Hi, this is Dr. Pierre Milo speaking, narrating my book, Rising from the Ashes of Loss, My Voyage Through Grief. Available at Amazon.com. Post number 26. We are now at the pre-loss period, where I'm going to have to deal with anger, resentment, bitterness, irritability, and bargaining. May I remind the listeners that this book is not necessarily about Louise and her sickness. It's mainly about me, the caretaker. That is why I have written this book, to help anybody who would be in a situation like me, taking care of somebody who is sick. So, this period was mainly dedicated to completing the 5 treatments left in the first round of chemotherapy. The rate was 1 treatment every 2 to 3 weeks, and before each session, a blood test was required to make sure that Louise's white blood count was high enough to sustain the treatment successfully. The sessions were long, exhausting, and scary for her, as she always had an aversion for needles, to the point that she almost fainted at the mere sight of them. To top it off, her veins were minuscule, which made the treatment even more difficult and painful, a fact that was about to transform her life into a real nightmare in the months to come. Finding a good vein to work with had become quite an undertaking for the oncology nurses. The multitudes of tests, blood work, scan, treatments rendered her veins so fragile and sensitive that eventually there was no other choice but to stab her through the veins at the top of her hands. A very sensitive spot, and anyone who's ever had an injection there can vouch for that. Imagine spending 6 to 8 hours lying on a bed with a bunch of tubes and needles painfully stuck in your hand while burning liquid is being pumped through your body. It was a soul-troubling experience. It was terribly hard for me to see her like this, all wired up like a damn robot, wincing and suffering. My protective side was taking quite a beating at that time. I wanted to scream my frustrations, rip out all the paraphernalia, take her home, pump her full of painkillers, and let nature take its course, and allow her to die painlessly in peace and dignity. If only we would have known the outcome of our journey then. This might have spared us a lot of suffering and anguish, and would have achieved the same results, but only sooner. But who's to know the future, right? Nevertheless, it was mainly her decision to take the treatments, and she would go all the way regardless, and I knew it. She was that kind of a person. There was nothing I could do but reluctantly stand guard, suck it up, and swallow my resentment. Little did I know then that shutting my big mouth would also be a prudent attitude to adopt all through these tribulations. As we were soon about to find out, making waves and going outside the system was not a prudent thing to do. They say it never rains, but it pours. And of course, as if the needle's stuff was not enough, Louise unbelievably developed an allergic reaction, some sort of horrific reddish and itchy rash at the site of the injection. A reaction to the anti-allergic medication, imagine that. If it wasn't so serious, it'd be laughable. An allergic reaction to an anti-allergy drug. Oh. So, of course, the injections, which were fast acting, had to be stopped and replaced by a pill, another pill, to be taken orally. The bummer, though, is that that pill took longer to kick in, thus making the sessions even longer. Of course, during the long hours of waiting, I had time to think. Not always a good thing, though. For an overactive intellect like mine, and my musing, stemming from fear and resentment, went from cursing all the gods ever known to man to praying, making deals with the same guys. Wow. Lying at the bottom of a well of despair, like I was during some of those horrible days, I was willing to reconsider my options, and I did. Just in case, I could have been wrong in my views of the crazy world. What if there's a God? What if I was wrong? What if he occasionally listened to poor saps like me? What if I prayed hard enough and made him listen to my plea, convinced him that Louise was a good person, worth a blink for him? What if I promised to become a better person, dedicated to the service of others? Would that help? But wait, I sarcastically reflected at times. Don't miracles occur spontaneously sometimes? Like I read in some religious books? I'm waiting, God. Do your thing. She's suffering and every minute counts. Don't you have a heart? Or are you going to feed me the scrappy line that you work in mysterious ways? That's it, a learning experience for her and for me. That I should have faith, and that every good thing happens to him who waits long enough. I'm watching you, God. I was in a sarcastic mood, I'll tell you that. I'm watching you, God. You'd better perform. Otherwise, I'm reverting to believing that you're nothing but an imaginary being and a fabrication created directly out of the twisted minds of somber prophets and greedy kings to suit their purposes. On I went on with the pleas and threats, venting my frustrations, until I often fell asleep, exhausted, and no further ahead than when I started. Useless. Mental note. In retrospect, all through the years that Louise was sick, I must have gone through this bargaining and threatening routine 100 times. And an elusive God still remains silent and unresponsive, even to my threats. Who knows? Maybe it was her karma to end her life in pain and suffering. Something she had to accomplish for the sake of her spiritual growth. I'll never know. Maybe God does work in mysterious ways for some and not for others. I wonder. I respect other people's spiritual values and the fact that they may find strength and solace in the belief that a higher being is looking after them. But as for me, I think this is nonsense. Life is life, and it just doesn't care. We're a part of nature, and nature is the only true God energy as far as I'm concerned. We're all caught up in the same never-ending cycle of living and dying. Pain is part of the evolutionary process. Therefore, it's not good or bad. It just is. Karma is karma. And in spite of our greatest efforts to fly away on our own, we're always dragged back into the learning pathways set forth for us at birth. Free choice only goes so far.